Hey everyone, this is Chris Perrey, one of the ministers at the Westlink Church of Christ. I want to say thanks for listening to the poorly recorded audio from our classes as we're going through the book of Romans in this series, When in Rome, Do as Jesus Does. I haven't posted in a few weeks, but we just finished 3 weeks looking at sexuality at the end of Romans chapter 1. It's a pretty important passage, at least for how it gets used. And so, because of various things that came up and we had to shorten class time a few times, we ended up making it a 3-parter instead of just one single class. And this first week, I didn't get the recording started in time. And so we began the class with a discussion of the question, what is most important or what leads when it comes to where God is leading us? Scripture, tradition, or experience? In some ways, this goes back to the Methodist quadrilateral, if you've ever heard of that. But Richard Rohr has also talked about it as like a tricycle, where it's the 3 wheels. Which one is in the front? Which one is kind of steering things? And the others are also supporting that. And so we had good discussion. Again, sorry we didn't get it on here. And a lot of times, especially in our tradition, we would say Scripture is the front wheel. That's what's driving things. But what we kind of argue as we go through, and you'll hear us talk about this, is that experience is actually kind of the starting place because we are always subjective. We are always bringing in our own experiences, and that's what causes us to reflect on Scripture. And so that's why we're taking a deep dive and reflecting on this passage. So here's the audio from class. It'll pick up with Gary as he was wrapping up that discussion. Thanks for listening.
And so all of a sudden now we come to the Scriptures with experience of learning more about what this Greek word is. And so now we say, okay, we now understand this Scripture better. Right? And so I got a letter, on that said, you were talking about newer ancient manuscripts used words in different ways that totally changed the perceived, previously accepted meaning of that word in Scripture, leaving the impression that our interpretation and understanding of whatever Scripture you were referring to was wrong. Okay? And so what this person went on was talking about was, all these years, we have said this is what it means. Now you're telling us with the unfolding of the Greek word used in a lot of different ways in different writings that we have, it could be something different? How can the Bible change? So now you're saying that all those years of understanding and all those years of interpretation and all of those were wrong. And so it feels like a judgment on everything that has happened in the past. And so when I talked to the person, it was this. It's like, no, wait, what is driving us to understand? Instead of saying we were wrong, we've come to a greater understanding. How is that bad? How is that off? I hope that all of us are growing in our understanding. I hope the medical field continues to learn how to deal with different things like cancer and different things like Alzheimer's. I hope that they're continuing to say, no, we're not going to put leeches on you, okay, and suck your blood out.
They actually do that.
Sometimes. I know they do. I know. I hope they don't, though.
They've gone back to it and realized it was a good treatment.
It was a good treatment.
Sometimes.
So what we're saying is, when we come to Romans, it's very important for us to be open to continually discuss and think about what Paul is doing there. So let's recap. Is that fair?
You want? Well, let me say a little bit more.
Yes, you say. Chris will follow up on that, and then let's recap, because here's one of the things that I keep coming back to. I don't know if Chris is going to say this or not, but I'll turn it over to him. But one of the things that we keep coming back to is Romans chapter 1 has been used in so many different ways, and the one way that is almost never used is the way that Paul says in chapter 2. You cannot use it to judge anyone else, or you're judging yourself. So whatever you want to interpret Romans chapter 1 to say, the one thing that whatever we come up with, Paul says, can't be used to judge to judge those people that you just read about. All right? And so that's the one thing that we want to keep coming back to. Okay, so how do we use that? And that's what we're trying to sort through. Okay, follow up?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, and Gary says Romans 1, but we're particularly focusing on verses 26 and 27, the verses that talk about sexuality and especially same-sex activity. Because, when we're going through these sort of debates, so often what you tend to hear is, well, the Bible's clear. And that is used in a way to really just shut down any discussion, any argument. No, it's clear. But it's clear until, like Gary said, you learn that words could be translated in more than one way, or that there's a history to that translation. The Bible's clear until life proves to be more complex. The Bible's clear until our or loved ones' experiences don't fit those assumptions. And in fact, I would say that people of faith reevaluating the Bible, reevaluating what God actually wants, is the story of the Bible. Moabites are bad and not allowed in the assembly until we meet Ruth, who becomes the grandmother of King David. Gentiles have to follow Jewish law to be included until the Spirit includes them without it, which is still what they're dealing with in this book. Or, gay people must hate God until you meet someone of faith with a different sexual orientation or experience. And so like Gary said, humility always needs to be our stance when we come to difficult questions or questions that aren't as difficult. I could be wrong. We're trying to present that there might, based on other experiences, how can we read this best? And so like Gary said, the big move that we focused on last week in chapters 1 and going into 2 is getting us, he's kind of tricking us into this us versus them thinking. Chapter 1 is all, this is how they are, right? They do this, they do this, they do this. They're the worst. But then you get to chapter 2 but who are you to judge? He turns it back on ourselves. As one writer kind of described, out of control lust, which I think he's talking about here, being judgmental as he gets into chapter 2. Every other harmful action or sin is a symptom of the same root sin, which is a self-centered asserting of yourself at the expense of someone else, your group or your personal perspective. And so then it was Gentile Christians and Jewish Christians. That the Jewish Christians thought, well, this is the way we have always done it. Our tradition, this is the way we read the Bible. But experience was saying, well, maybe that's not the only way. And I think that's a similar debate that we're having now as we think about LGBTQ people. And so, again, more than we can get into in 3 minutes, obviously, so we're going to continue this discussion. But we want to think about, again, why do we have the strong reactions that we do, and what is behind that? Like Gary said, if you're just trying to figure out, okay, well, tell me exactly what he's saying so that I know who to judge exactly, you're still missing the point. And we do want to go through what Paul is talking about, what his assumptions might be, what people thought at the time. But it's also that we can look at our experiences now and figure things out. All right. Well, real quick, some of this we've talked about before in here. We went through 1 Corinthians, was that last year? I lose track of time and everything. But we talked about there in 1 Corinthians 6, when there's a couple words that get translated in particular ways, that there's a difference in how we understand sexuality now and how they understood it in the ancient world. For one thing, just the idea of sexual orientation is a modern concept. Literally the words gay or homosexual were not in their vocabulary. And so our translations in English have changed over time because our understanding has changed. That's not inherently bad, right? As we English changes, and so translations might change with it. We gain new information, but sometimes when that happens, it's really not exactly reflecting what Paul is talking about because the way we use these words. And so, as we've mentioned before, the word homosexual doesn't occur in an English Bible until, anyone want to guess what year?
Oh.
Okay.
Masters.
Was it 1950 something?
1946. Yeah, you're close. Well, that was, yeah, around that time. And so, what are they talking, right? We're just saying that the word, the language that Paul would have in his mind is not the same language we would have, even if, depending on what he's looking at, might be similar to things that we see. So, distinguishing homosexual behavior from homosexual attraction, that's a modern concept. That is alien to Paul's worldview. We can have that discussion, but we should recognize Paul is not really weighing in specifically on that debate. And so, we're going to dig really deeply into what seems to be the issue, what seems to be the problem that he's addressing, probably next week. But as we close, I know. What is we want to think about the root.
Now, are you saying they didn't have homosexual?
No, there was activity there was same-sex activity, but they wouldn't use that word to describe it. They wouldn't say that this person was gay. They would just see, that's why. Now, again, we're out of time. Kids are already coming out.
Well, good.
The question, well, and maybe this is the best. Nice. I think we want to think about the problem of lust. What do we mean when we say lust? How would you define it? Why is it harmful? And where do we see that as the root behind all sorts of activity? So, that's where we'll pick up next week. Sorry to leave. I know, it's like we keep leaving you hanging.
Questions?
Yes. So, yes, I know we're raising lots of questions, and we'll have a lot more time for discussion.